I keep the photograph on my nightstand now, not because it makes me happy. I keep it there because every morning, before the world has a chance to remind me of everything I know, I need to look at it. I need to see her face the way it looked that day, full of light, full of certainty, her eyes closed and her head tilted back in laughter at something her new husband had whispered in her ear. I need to see that moment before I remember what I know about the man standing beside her, his hand on the small of her back, his smile wide and easy for the cameras. I need to remind myself why I did what I did. My name is not important. What matters is that I'm a father. I have been a father for 28 years, and in all that time, the single greatest ambition of my life, the thing I worked toward every single day, was to give my daughter a life better than the one I had, to give her safety, to give her a man who would honor her the way she deserved to be honored. I thought I had done that. For 31 days after the wedding, I believed with my whole heart that I had done that. Then the phone rang. Let me take you back to the beginning, because you need to understand how good everything seemed. You need to feel the warmth of it before I show you the cold underneath. Her name is Lily. She has her mother's eyes, pale green with gold flecks near the center, and she has always been the kind of person who fills a room without trying. She laughs loudly and cries easily, and she was never ashamed of either. When she was 7, she used to climb into my lap after dinner and make me tell her stories about heroes, about people who did the right thing even when it was hard. I told her those stories for years, never imagining that one day I would find myself inside one. She met Daniel at a work conference 3 years ago. She came home afterward and described him the way people describe a meal they didn't expect to love, surprised by their own enthusiasm, slightly defensive about it. He was in finance, she said. He was smart and funny, and he had this way of listening to people that made them feel like the only person in the room. She said it almost as a warning to herself, like she knew she was already in trouble. I met him 6 weeks later. He came to Sunday dinner at our house, mine and my wife Carol's, and he brought flowers for Carol and a bottle of wine he had clearly researched in advance because he knew I liked a particular region of Burgundy without me ever having told him. That should have been the first small flag, I realize now. He had done his homework. He had prepared. But at the time I read it as thoughtfulness, as the kind of effort a man makes when he wants to be taken seriously. And I respected it. Over the next 2 years, Daniel became a fixture in our lives. He came to birthdays and holidays. He helped me replace the gutters on the house one autumn weekend and didn't complain once. He took Carol to a doctor's appointment when I was stuck in a meeting and sat with her in the waiting room for 2 hours and never mentioned it to me, only to her. She told me about it weeks later, moved to tears. He remembered dates. He sent handwritten notes for no reason. He was, in every observable way, exactly the kind of man you hope your daughter finds. He proposed on a Tuesday, which Lily said she loved because he told her he didn't want it to be a performance. He just wanted it to be real. He took her to the park where they had their first real conversation, and he got down on one knee in the middle of a Wednesday afternoon with no photographer hiding in the bushes and no flash mob and no audience. Just the two of them and a ring that had belonged to his grandmother. She called me from the park, crying so hard I could barely understand her, and I sat down in my office chair, and I cried too. The wedding was set for the following spring. 10 months of planning, of venues and florists and cake tastings and seating charts, of Carol and Lily disappearing into a world of fabric swatches and invitation fonts that I wanted no part of, but watched with enormous fondness from the periphery. I paid for everything without complaint, because I wanted to, because this was the moment. This was what all of it had been building toward. The venue was a property about 40 minutes outside the city, an old estate with stone walls and ivy and a garden that looked like something out of a painting. There were 200 guests. There was a string quartet during the ceremony and a band that played into the night. There was a 7-tier cake that took 3 people to carry. There was everything you could want. And I stood at the end of that aisle watching my daughter walk toward the man she loved, and I felt something I had only felt a handful of times in my life. A completeness. A sense that the story had arrived at exactly the right place. I walked her down the aisle myself. Carol was already seated in the front row, already crying, already holding the small square of linen she had brought specifically for the occasion. The guests were standing. The music was swelling. And Lily, in her dress with her mother's eyes bright and shining, looked at me and said very quietly, "Don't you dare cry, Dad." And then she laughed because we both knew I already was. The ceremony was beautiful and simple. They had written their own vows. Daniel spoke first, and I will tell you that the man could speak. He had a voice like river water, smooth and unhurried, and the words he chose for Lily were specific and tender. He talked about watching her make decisions, how she always chose the harder right thing over the easier wrong one, and how that quality in her had made him want to become more honest in his own life. He said she had made him better. Everyone was weeping. I was weeping. Even the efficient seemed to be struggling. Lily spoke second. She talked about the moment she knew, which was not the grand romantic moment you might expect, but a quiet evening when she had been sick with the flu, and Daniel had driven 40 minutes to bring her soup, and then fallen asleep in the chair beside her bed reading a book, and she had woken up at 3 a.m. and looked at him sleeping there and thought, "Oh, it's you. It's always going to be you." The reception was loud and warm and full of dancing and toasts that went on longer than anyone planned, because everyone had something to say about these two people. Daniel's best man was his college roommate, a large, cheerful man named Marcus, who told 3 mildly embarrassing stories that all somehow ended with Daniel being the hero. Lily's maid of honor, her best friend since childhood, Petra, spoke for 15 minutes without notes and made Lily laugh and cry at the same time. I danced with my daughter to a song she had loved since she was a teenager. I held her close, and I told her I was proud of her, and she told me to stop it, or she'd ruin her makeup, and then she put her head on my shoulder and we swayed together, and I thought, this is it. This is the moment I'll remember when I'm very old and everything else has faded. This moment. Right here. Daniel danced with his mother, a quiet, elegant woman named Patricia, who had been warm and welcoming from the first time we met. He was careful with her on the dance floor, attentive, making her laugh. Good sons usually make good husbands. That's what I believed. The night ended late. Lily and Daniel left in a shower of paper confetti, climbing into a car that would take them to a hotel before their honeymoon flight the next morning. She looked back at me through the car window as they pulled away, and she blew me a kiss, and I caught it, which was something we had done since she was small, a private thing between us. And then the car turned the corner, and they were gone. I stood in the parking lot with Carol's arm through mine, and I breathed in the cool night air, and I felt genuinely, uncomplicated, happy. Which, as any adult will tell you, is a rare and precious thing. That was 31 days before the phone call. I was in the kitchen making coffee on a Thursday morning. Carol had already left for her book club meeting. The house was quiet the way it gets when you have lived in it a long time and all the children have grown up and moved out. Lily and Daniel were living in an apartment on the other side of the city, and they had just returned from their honeymoon in Portugal. And Lily had called me the night before to describe the food in such detail that I had gone to bed dreaming about pastries. The call came at 9:17 in the morning. I almost didn't answer because I didn't recognize the number, but something made me pick up. Some small instinct that I have learned, in retrospect, to trust. "Is this Mr. Callahan?" The voice was male, slightly breathless, the kind of voice that belongs to someone who has been sitting with something difficult and hasn't slept. "It is," I said. "My name is Owen Breslin. I was the photographer at your daughter's wedding." I knew who he was immediately. A quiet, focused young man in his early 30s who had moved through the reception like a ghost, always in the right place, never intrusive. Lily had chosen him based on his portfolio, which showed an eye for the unguarded moment, the glance between people that says more than any posed portrait ever could. "Of course," I said. "Owen, is everything all right?" There was a pause, long enough that I set my coffee cup down. "Mr. Callahan, I need to speak with you about something. I've been going through the footage and the photos from the wedding, the full edit, and I noticed something. Something I can't quite explain, but that I think you need to see." He paused again. "I'm sorry to be so vague on the phone. I'd rather show you in person. Could you come to my studio? As soon as possible, if you're able?" "What kind of something?" I asked. My voice was calm, My chest was knot. "I don't want to alarm you before you've seen it for yourself," he said. "But I want to be honest with you. It disturbed me. It disturbed me enough that I've been sitting on this for a week trying to decide if I was imagining it, and I don't think I am." Another pause, and then he said the words that changed everything. "Please don't say anything to your daughter yet. Not until you've seen what I have to show you." I drove to his studio that same morning. It was in a neighborhood I didn't know well, above a dry cleaner's, up a narrow flight of stairs that opened onto a surprisingly large space with exposed brick and photographs on every wall. Owen met me at the top of the stairs. He looked like a man who had not been sleeping. His eyes were shadowed, and his handshake was tight and brief, like someone bracing themselves. "Thank you for coming so quickly," he said. "You didn't give me a lot of choice," I said, and he nodded, acknowledging that. He had his editing setup arranged at a large desk, 2 monitors side by side. He had clearly prepared for this meeting because there were images already pulled up, a folder organized with files labeled by time of day. He pulled out a chair for me and sat down in his own, and then he folded his hands on the desk for a moment and looked at me. "Before I show you this, I want to say that I am not certain of what it means. I'm a photographer. I observe people. I notice things, but I could be wrong about the context, and I hope that I am." He looked at the screen. "I also want you to know that I thought very seriously about whether to call you at all. I almost didn't, but in the end I couldn't not call. I have a sister. If I saw something like this at her wedding and stayed quiet, I don't think I could live with myself." "Just show me," I said. He nodded and turned to the screen. The first image was a photograph taken during the cocktail hour, before dinner, when guests were mingling in the garden. In the foreground, a group of women I recognized as Carol's friends were laughing at something. In the background, slightly soft and out of focus in the way background subjects often are, Daniel was standing near the bar talking to a man I didn't recognize. That in itself was nothing unusual. What Owen pointed to was Daniel's expression. I had to lean closer to the screen. Even in the soft focus, even as a background element, there was something off about the way Daniel was standing. His back was partially turned to the room, which was not how he had stood all evening, and his body language was closed in a way I had never seen from him. He was leaning in toward the man he was speaking with, his head angled down, his jaw set. The easy warmth he had worn all day was gone. "I might not have noticed this at all," Owen said, "except that I caught the same 2 men in 3 other frames from the same period. Each time, different angle, same conversation." He clicked to the next photo. This one was from a different vantage point, and the 2 men were more central in the frame, though still clearly not the intended subjects of the shot. The man Daniel was speaking with was shorter, broad-shouldered, somewhere in his mid-40s, with dark hair going gray at the temples. He was wearing a suit that fit well, but not expensively. I did not recognize him. "Who is that man?" I asked. "I don't know," Owen said. "He's not in any of the photographs I took of the receiving line." I checked. He was not one of the guests who greeted the couple when they arrived at the reception. He may have been a +1 who came with someone else, or he may have come in through the garden entrance, which was open for a period during the cocktail hour. "Why does it matter that they were talking?" "On its own, maybe it doesn't," Owen said carefully. "But keep watching." He pulled up a video clip next. Wedding photographers often shoot short video alongside their stills, ambient footage that captures movement and sound, used later for highlight reels. This clip was shot from across the garden, perhaps 30 feet away. There was no audio at this distance, or rather, the audio was the general sound of the party, music and conversation, and glasses clinking. But the image was clear enough. Daniel and the unknown man. Daniel reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a small white envelope. Not the kind of envelope that holds a card, smaller, flat. He passed it to the man in a way that was so practiced, so quick, that if you blinked, you would miss it entirely. The man took it without looking down and pocketed it with equal smoothness. They did not shake hands. They did not embrace. Within 20 seconds, they had separated, and Daniel was walking back toward the main room, his smile already reassembled and easy on his face. I stared at the screen. "It could be nothing," Owen said quietly. "People pass things at events all the time. A business card, a gift, cash for a vendor." "You don't believe that," I said. No, he admitted. I don't. The way he moved, the angle of his body away from the room, the speed of it. That was a man who did not want to be seen doing what he was doing. Owen continued clicking through photographs. Most of what he showed me next was subtle, the kind of thing that only registers if you are looking for a pattern. Daniel checking his phone repeatedly during the dinner hour, always briefly, always holding it below the table level. Daniel leaving the room twice during the toasts, once for almost 10 minutes, returning with a slightly different quality to his stillness, a deliberateness that looked rehearsed rather than natural. A moment caught in the background of a dance floor wide shot where Daniel was standing near the exit corridor speaking to someone on his phone, his free hand pressed flat against the wall beside him, a posture I associated with concentration or stress, not a man enjoying his wedding reception. And then Owen showed me the last photograph. It was taken late in the evening, after midnight, near the very end of the reception. It was a long exposure shot of the garden, taken with a slow shutter to capture the lights strung in the trees and the movement of the few guests still dancing on the outdoor portion of the floor. Long exposure photography creates a kind of blur around moving figures, while stationary things remain sharp. In the foreground, beautifully in focus, was a stone planter with white roses. In the middle distance, slightly blurred, were two figures standing very close together. One was unmistakably Daniel. The other I could not identify because the long exposure had blurred the face and form into softness. What I could see was that the unknown figure was close to Daniel in a way that was intimate. Not romantic, not exactly, but close in the way people stand when they are saying something they need to be heard over the noise of a party, when they are making a point that matters. And Daniel's posture, even blurred, even in a long exposure photograph taken by accident, was entirely different from the man I had watched dance with his mother an hour earlier. He looked diminished. He looked like a man receiving instructions, not a man celebrating the best night of his life. I sat back in the chair. My mouth was dry. I was thinking about Lily in Portugal, in the photographs she had sent me, laughing in a square with a paper cup of wine in her hand. I was thinking about the way she had looked at him on the dance floor, the way she had believed every word he said. "There's one more thing," Owen said. He sounded apologetic, which is how people sound when they have saved the worst for last. He pulled up a final video clip. This one had been recorded inside the venue, in the corridor between the main hall and the catering kitchen. The timestamp in the corner read 11:42 p.m. Lily and Daniel had said their good nights and left the venue at 11:56, so this was 14 minutes before the official end of their wedding. In the corridor, visible from the angle of a camera that had been placed to capture the coming and going of the kitchen staff, Daniel stood with a woman. She was elegantly dressed in a dark green gown, her hair up, so she was clearly a guest rather than staff. I did not recognize her. Daniel's back was mostly to the camera. The woman was facing him, and her face was visible. She was not crying, she was not laughing. She was looking at Daniel with an expression that I recognized immediately, because I had worn it myself in the hardest moments of my life. It was the expression of someone swallowing something they do not want to swallow, of someone accepting a situation they have been told they must accept. Daniel raised one hand and touched her cheek, briefly, the way you touch someone's face when you are trying to reassure them of something. And then he dropped his hand and said something, and she nodded. And they parted without touching again, moving in opposite directions down the corridor. I didn't speak for a long time. "Did you see this woman at any other point during the reception?" I asked. "Once," Owen said. "During dinner. She was seated at a table on the far side of the room, near the windows. Table 11. He pulled up a wide establishing shot of the dinner room. "I looked through the seating chart that your daughter sent me as part of the event documentation package. Table 11 was listed as friends of the groom, college connections." "What's her name?" "I don't know. The seating chart listed first names only in the files I have." I looked at the woman's face on the screen. She was perhaps 30, possibly a little older. She had one of those faces that you can tell has been composed very deliberately for a long time, self-possessed, careful. But in this corridor, in this 14 seconds of accidental footage, the composure had slipped just enough. I drove home in a state that I can only describe as controlled. There is a kind of fear that does not feel like fear in the moment. It feels like absolute clarity, like the world has become very sharp around the edges and everything extraneous has fallen away. I drove home and I went to the kitchen and I stood at the counter for a while without doing anything, and then I started making a list. I am not by nature an investigative person. I spent my career in civil engineering. I build things. I plan for load and stress, and I calculate what structures can bear and what they cannot. But I had once, in my 30s, spent a year working alongside the legal team in a dispute over a contractor's conduct, and I had learned something during that year. The truth is almost always in the paperwork. Follow the paperwork and you will find the truth. I started with what I knew. Daniel's last name was Ashworth. He worked at a mid-sized investment management firm in the city. He had grown up in a suburb about 3 hours away. His parents were divorced. His father remarried. His mother, Patricia, remained close to him. I had met cousins and aunts and old friends. I had met Marcus, his best man. I had met colleagues from his firm, people who spoke well of him in specific ways, not the vague compliments of acquaintance, but the precise praise of people who had worked beside someone and found them competent and reliable. I began there. I looked at the firm online, read through what was publicly available. It was a small but reputable operation, managing funds for high net worth individuals. Daniel was listed as a senior portfolio manager. I found several quotes from him in trade publications, nothing unusual, standard professional commentary on market conditions. I searched his name in combination with the names of anyone connected to him that I could think of. Nothing immediately strange emerged, but I was not looking for the obvious. The obvious had been there all along, and I had seen it and called it good. 3 days after meeting with Owen, I called Marcus, Daniel's best man. I told him I was calling to thank him again for his toast at the wedding, which was true, and we spoke briefly and warmly. And at the end I mentioned that I was trying to send a thank you note to all the guests, and I had lost the contact for one of them, a woman who had been seated at table 11. I described her in general terms, dark dress, dark hair up. The pause on Marcus's end lasted perhaps 2 seconds. In the context of a casual phone call, 2 seconds is a very long time. "I'm not sure who you mean," he said. He knew exactly who I meant. I let it pass. I thanked him and ended the call and sat with the 2-second pause for the rest of the afternoon. I did something next that I'm not proud of, not because it was wrong, but because of what it cost me emotionally. I called Patricia, Daniel's mother. I've always liked Patricia. She is reserved in the way that certain people become reserved after difficult years, but underneath it there is warmth and genuine feeling. She had cried at the wedding. She had hugged Lily with the kind of embrace that only makes sense if it comes from real love. I called her on the pretense of wedding follow-up. I told her we were putting together a thank you package for guests, and that I was trying to identify a few people I hadn't been able to meet properly on the night. I described the woman in the green dress. Patricia's silence was different from Marcus's. It was not the silence of someone choosing to conceal something. It was the silence of someone who had just been handed something they did not expect and were trying to understand why they were being handed it. "That sounds like it might be Claire," she said carefully. "Claire," I repeated. "Claire Holt. She and Daniel were close for a long time, years ago." She paused, and I could hear her measuring what she was willing to say. They were engaged, actually, before Lily, before all of this. It didn't work out. Another pause. "I'm surprised she was there, to be honest, but Daniel manages those things in his own way. He always has." I thanked her. I got off the phone. I sat down in my armchair in the living room and stared at the wall for a long time. Daniel had invited his former fiancée to his wedding. He had not mentioned this to me, to Carol, and I was increasingly certain, to Lily. He had spoken with her privately at the reception. He had touched her face, and the small white envelope changed hands with a man whose name I did not yet know. I needed to know more about Claire Holt, and I needed to know who the man in the background was. I spent the next several days doing the kind of methodical searching that I had never had cause to do before in my life. I found Claire Holt through professional networks. She was a corporate attorney, well-credentialed, partner track at a firm downtown. She and Daniel had overlapped at the same university, which was consistent with what Patricia had implied. Their engagement would have been perhaps 5 years ago based on what I could piece together from the timeline. They had separated, and then some reasonable amount of time later, Daniel had met Lily. What I could not find was any obvious reason for Claire to have been at the wedding. They had remained in the same city. They moved in some of the same professional circles. Perhaps Daniel had felt that not inviting her would be its own kind of statement, and inviting her was a way of demonstrating that everything was resolved and comfortable. People do that sometimes. They perform closure for an audience, but the corridor footage did not look like closure. The man with the envelope was harder. I had only Owen's photographs to work from, and I spent more hours than I can account for looking at them, studying the details I could make out. His suit, the cut of it, the color. A watch that caught the light in one frame, expensive looking. A certain way of carrying himself that suggested neither the academic world nor the creative one, but something with edges to it, something practical and perhaps aggressive. I made a decision on the 8th day after Owen's call. I went to see Daniel. I did not tell Carol what I was doing. I told her I was going into the city for a meeting, which was not entirely untrue. I had called Daniel that morning and told him I wanted to take him to lunch, just the two of us, a belated celebration. He'd been easy and warm on the phone, agreeable, suggesting a restaurant near his office. He seemed genuinely pleased by the invitation. Seeing him across the table was one of the hardest things I have ever done. He looked well. He was relaxed in the confident way he had always been, asking me about the house, about Carol's health, about a home improvement project I had mentioned to Lily once that he had filed away and remembered. He ordered a glass of wine and then, apparently catching himself, asked if that was all right with me, smiling. And I said of course. And I watched him and tried to see through the warmth to whatever was underneath it. I waited until we were midway through the meal. I did it carefully, as if I were testing the weight of a beam. I ran into a friend of yours recently, I said conversationally. Well, not ran into exactly. I saw her photo somewhere. Claire Holt. She was at the wedding, wasn't she? I watched his face. I want to tell you that I saw guilt or alarm, but what I saw was subtler than that. What I saw was a very slight recalibration, a fraction of a second in which he decided who to be in the next part of this conversation. Claire, yes, he said without hesitation. She and I were close for a while in our late 20s. It ended well. I invited her because it would have felt stranger not to. You know how it is with people you've known a long time. Of course, I said. Did you meet her at the wedding? She's wonderful. Very sharp. I didn't get the chance, I said. Did Lily know she'd be there? I mentioned it to her, he said, and there was nothing in his tone that gave it away, but I was a father, and I had watched this man for 2 years, and I knew the difference between how Daniel talked about things that were true and things that he wanted to be believed. When Daniel spoke about things that were true, there was a quality of ease to it, an unconsidered directness. When he was managing something, the ease was still there, but it was constructed, placed, like furniture arranged for a viewing. I let it go. I finished the meal, I hugged him in the street outside the restaurant, and I drove home, and I sat in my car in the driveway for 15 minutes because I could not yet bring my face to a state I was willing to show my wife. What I had learned at lunch was not a fact but a feeling. The feeling was this. Daniel Ashworth was someone who had many rooms inside him, and he was extremely skilled at showing you only the ones he wanted you to see. I called Owen that evening and asked him for something I had not asked for before. I asked him for the complete unedited footage from the wedding. Everything he had shot, including the ambient video, the setup shots, the early arrivals, everything. He sent me a large file transfer overnight, and I spent the following 2 days going through it methodically, hour by hour, starting from the earliest moment of the day when the venue was being set up and guests were beginning to arrive. It was in the early arrival footage that I found him again, the man with the envelope. He arrived alone at 11:20 in the morning, more than 2 hours before the ceremony. In the footage, which was clearly not intended as a record of anything significant, just ambient coverage of the venue's exterior and the beginning of the event, this man walked up the drive with the certainty of someone who had been here before. not as a guest exploring an unfamiliar place, as someone who knew the layout. He did not go to the front entrance where the early arrivals were gathering. He went around to the side, toward the service entrance that connected to the catering area in the back garden. He paused there, at the entrance, and looked back at the drive. Then he went in. I freeze-framed the footage and looked at the side of his face. 50% profile. Enough. I sent that frame to Owen and asked if he had any clearer shot from any other angle. He found one. A slightly better profile from the garden footage, about 45 minutes before the ceremony, when this man was standing near the fountain at the edge of the property, not socializing, not drinking, just standing, looking toward the venue's main entrance the way a man stands when he is waiting for something. I took that image to a retired detective I had known peripherally for years through community board work, a careful and private man who owed me nothing but had the kind of skills I did not. He needed 5 days, and he called me on a Tuesday morning and told me that the man's name was Raymond Keel. That Raymond Keel had a financial background, specifically in the area of private equity and high-yield investments. That Raymond Keel had been named in, though not charged with, a federal investigation into investment fraud approximately 4 years ago. That the investigation had been closed without charges for reasons that were noted in the record as relating to cooperation with prosecutors on a related matter. Cooperation with prosecutors. I sat with that for a very long time. And then I did something I should have done earlier. I stopped trying to understand Daniel's past and started trying to understand his present. I am a man with a network built over many decades of professional life. I know people in finance, not many, but some. I called one of them, a cautious and meticulous woman named Helen, who had been a compliance officer at a large firm for 20 years before retiring, and who understood the culture and mechanisms of investment management better than almost anyone I knew. I described what I knew without naming Daniel. I described the profile, senior portfolio manager, mid-size firm, connection to a man with a prior federal investigation for fraud who appeared to have cooperated with prosecutors. A transaction at a social event, discreet, conducted with practiced ease. Helen was quiet for a long moment. If I had to guess, she said carefully, and I want to be clear that this is nothing more than a guess, I would say you're describing a situation where someone is operating under some form of ongoing obligation. Either as a continuing cooperator, which means they're still actively providing information to someone, or alternatively, and this is the darker version, they have been turned in a different direction entirely. Someone who cooperated once can be leveraged in other ways by other parties. Meaning? Meaning someone could know about the cooperation and use that knowledge to compel behavior, ongoing behavior, the kind that looks legitimate from the outside and is not. I thought about the wedding, about the careful, practiced ease with which the envelope changed hands, about a man who was very good at appearing to be exactly what you needed him to be. I thought about my daughter. I called Owen again, and I told him what I had found and what I suspected. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said something I had not expected. "There's something I didn't show you," he said, "because I wasn't sure it was relevant. I thought it was just a coincidence." "What is it?" "A name. On the footage from the early arrival period, when I was doing ambient shooting near the entrance, there's a moment where one of the venue coordinators is going through a clipboard, checking off arrivals. I didn't think anything of it at the time, but a name is briefly visible on the list. It's highlighted in a way that the other names aren't. He sent me a still from that footage, blown up and sharpened in post-processing. The clipboard was only partially legible. Most of the names were too small or too angled to read, but one name, highlighted in yellow, was clear enough. Ashworth, D. There were 2 letters written next to it in what appeared to be a different hand, smaller, as if added later or by someone other than the event coordinator. The letters were R.K. Raymond Keel. They had arranged to be at the same event. It was not coincidental. The man had known Daniel would be there, or rather, Daniel had known the man would be there, and someone had made sure of it, on his wedding day. I need to stop here for a moment and tell you what it feels like to learn something like this about a person your daughter loves. It is not rage, or not only rage. It is something more architectural than that. It is the feeling of watching a building you helped construct reveal a flaw in its foundation. Every floor above the flaw is suddenly suspect. Every wall, every ceiling. The beautiful thing you looked at and called solid is the same beautiful thing that might come down. I thought about everything I had watched Daniel do and be over 2 years. The gutters, the soup when Lily was sick, the flowers for Carol and the burgundy wine, the handwritten notes. I thought about whether any of it was real, and I arrived at the only honest answer, which was that I did not know. I did not know which version of Daniel Ashworth was the performance and which was the man. And then I thought about Claire Holt. I called her. It took me a day to find a number, and I called from a number she would not recognize on a Thursday evening, and she answered on the third ring with the professional confidence of someone who takes calls from unknown numbers because unknown numbers sometimes matter. "Claire Holt," she said. "Ms. Holt, my name is James Callahan. My daughter is Lily Callahan. She married Daniel Ashworth last month. I'm sorry to call you without warning. I have some questions I need to ask you, and I am asking you as her father." A very long pause. "How did you get this number?" she asked. Her voice had not changed in pitch, but it had changed in texture. "I found it. I'm sorry. Please don't hang up." She did not hang up. "What do you want to know?" she said. "I want to know why you were at the wedding." "Daniel invited me." "I know that. I want to know why you accepted." Another pause, and in this one I could feel something being decided, weighed, resolved. "Because I was worried about him," she said at last. "I know how that sounds. We haven't been together in 4 years. It is not my business anymore. But Daniel and I were together for 3 years, and I know him. I know what he looks like when he is in over his head, and I had seen him twice in the months before the wedding, and I was worried." "Worried about what?" I asked. "About who he was involved with," she said quietly. "About choices he had made several years ago that he told me were behind him, and that I had reason to believe were not behind him." "Raymond Keel," I said. This pause was different from all the others. This pause was the sound of a woman recalibrating everything she had planned to say. "You know about Ray," she said. "I'm learning," I said. What Claire told me over the next 30 minutes was this: she and Daniel had been engaged. During the period of their engagement, she had discovered that Daniel had been involved on the periphery of a fraud scheme, not as the architect, not even as a primary participant, but as someone who had looked the other way when certain transactions had moved through accounts he managed in exchange for what she described as significant personal financial benefit. He had cooperated with federal investigators, as I had already learned, and in doing so had avoided prosecution. What she had not known until later was that the cooperation was not clean. Raymond Keel was the person Daniel had nominally cooperated against, but Keel and Daniel had, in her belief, reached their own private arrangement, one in which Daniel's testimony was carefully calibrated to be technically helpful to prosecutors while not actually threatening Keel's operation in any significant way. In exchange, she believed, Keel continued to provide Daniel with access to investment opportunities that were not available through legitimate channels: high returns, clean on paper, dirty in origin. She had ended the engagement when she understood what she was living inside. She had not reported what she knew because she did not have documentation, only understanding, and because she had believed for a time that Daniel was genuinely trying to extricate himself. "And now?" I asked. "And now your daughter is married to him," she said, and her voice was entirely without heat, entirely without anything that would let me call it jealousy or bitterness, and that absence was the most frightening thing about it. I sat in the chair in my home office with the phone in my hand after she hung up, and I looked at the photograph on the desk in front of me. A framed photograph from the wedding that Lily had given Carol and me as a gift, the two of them on the steps of the venue, laughing, golden in the late afternoon light. And I thought about what I had to do next. I thought about walking into my daughter's home and sitting down with her and telling her what I had learned. I thought about her face as she heard it. I thought about the particular way love becomes grief, the specific physics of it, the way it does not vanish but transforms into something heavier. I thought about whether I might be wrong. I had pieced this together from photographs and a conversation with a former fiancé, and the second-hand opinion of a compliance expert. I had conjecture and pattern, but not proof. And then I thought about the envelope, and the corridor, and his hand on Claire's face, and the careful, practiced ease of a man who had learned to live in 2 registers at the same time. I called Lily. She answered on the first ring with the warmth and slight distraction of someone in the middle of something domestic, and I heard Daniel's voice in the background, some comment she laughed at, and she said, "Dad, hi, hold on 1 second." And there was movement in a door, and then her voice was quieter and she said, "Is everything okay? You sound weird." "Everything's fine," I said, because I needed another day. "I just wanted to hear your voice." She laughed and told me I was being sentimental, and I said yes, I probably was, and we talked for 10 minutes about nothing in particular, and she was happy. She was genuinely happy in the way I had prayed she would be, and the sound of it was almost unbearable. After we hung up, I made one more call, to a lawyer I had known for 15 years, a careful and thorough man, and I told him everything. I told him all of it. He was quiet for a long time. "This needs to go to someone with authority," he said. "If what you're describing is accurate, the federal investigators who handled the original case will want to know that the cooperation arrangement was compromised. This isn't just a family matter. This is potentially ongoing criminal conduct." "I know," I said. "James," he said, "I want to ask you something. You said the former fiancée told you she believed Daniel had been trying to extricate himself at some point, before she left him. Yes? And you said the interaction you saw between Daniel and Keel at the wedding, the envelope, was conducted with what looked like practiced ease, like something done before." "Yes. But I want you to consider something. The footage of Daniel and Claire in the corridor, the way she looked, what you described as someone accepting something they don't want to accept." He paused. "What if what you were watching was not a man conducting his double life comfortably? What if it was a man who has been trying for years to get out of something and has not been able to, and his former fiancée knows that, and she came to the wedding not because she is a threat to your daughter, but because she is the only person left who knows how frightened he actually is?" I held the phone very still. "What if the envelope," my lawyer continued, "was not Daniel paying a co-conspirator, but Daniel paying a debt? The kind of debt that doesn't go away? The kind where a man like Keel makes an appearance at your wedding to remind you of exactly what you owe and exactly what happens if you stop paying." The room was very quiet. I thought about the way Daniel had looked in the background of those photographs. Not the easy, confident warmth of the foreground Daniel, the toasting and dancing Daniel. The background Daniel, the one Owen's camera had caught without meaning to, in the unguarded corners of the most important day of his life. I thought about the set of his jaw in the conversation near the bar, the hand pressed flat against the wall in the corridor while he made that phone call. The posture I had read as a man receiving instructions. What if it was a man who was afraid? I called Owen one final time, and I asked him to pull up the corridor video again. And this time, I looked at it differently. I looked at Daniel's posture not as the posture of a man who was in control of a secret, but as the posture of a man standing in the middle of something he had not found a way out of on the night that should have been the freest night of his life, trying to say something to the only person who understood the full weight of it. I thought about the vows. I will be honest with you. I thought about what Daniel had said in those vows. He had said that Lily had made him want to become more honest in his own life. I thought about what it takes to say that in public, in front of 200 people, on a day when a man you cannot refuse has come to stand at the edge of your garden and remind you of the price of the life you are trying to leave behind. I went to my daughter the next morning, not with accusation, not with the cold facts arranged like exhibits. I went as her father. I sat across from her at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold in my hands, and I looked at her face, which is her mother's face, and I told her that I loved her. I told her that I had learned something that frightened me and that I had spent a long time trying to understand what it meant, and that I did not yet have all the answers. And then I told her the truth, all of it. The photographer, the photographs, the envelope, and the corridor, and the woman in the green dress, and Raymond Keel, and the federal investigation, and the compliance officer's quiet assessment, and the phone call with Claire Holt. I laid it out, all of it, as plainly and as carefully as I could, because she deserved plainness and care in equal measure. She listened. She did not interrupt. She held her own coffee cup in both hands, and she looked at the table, and she was very still in the way she had always been, still when she was processing something difficult, the way she had been still at 7 years old when I told her about the death of a grandmother she loved. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she looked up at me and she said, "I know." 2 words. I know. She said it not with the distance of someone confessing a secret, but with the exhausted relief of someone setting down something very heavy. And what came next undid everything I thought I understood about what I had walked into that morning. She told me that Daniel had told her, before the wedding. Not all of it, not every detail, but the essential shape of it. The mistake he had made, the man he had been involved with, the years of trying to untangle himself from something that did not let go easily, the cooperation that had not been clean. She said he had sat with her in this kitchen, in these chairs, 6 weeks before the wedding, and he had told her, because he had decided that he could not marry her without her knowing, and because he trusted her more than he had ever trusted anyone. She had not told me because she had not wanted me to worry, because she had believed, and still believed, that he was genuinely trying to find a way out. Because she knew him, she said, looking at me with her mother's eyes. She knew the man who had slept in a chair beside her when she was sick, and she knew that man was real. And Daniel had, in the weeks before the wedding, made contact with federal investigators, not through the original compromise channel but through a separate attorney. He had begun the process, slow and frightening, of providing real information, information that would matter. Raymond Keel's appearance at the wedding was not a routine collection, it was a warning. Someone had told Keel about the contact with investigators. The envelope had been Keel returning the message in the oldest possible way. Paying someone's debt means nothing compared to paying with your freedom. Daniel was at that moment in the middle of something genuinely dangerous. He had known Keel would come. He had let him come because refusing to engage would have been worse than pretending, for one more day, that everything was normal. The woman in the corridor was Claire, who had known the risk he was taking, who had come because he had asked her to, because she was the only person who could look him in the eye on that day and remind him that what he was doing was the right thing, even though it was the hardest thing. My daughter reached across the table and took my hand. She said, "He's trying to be the person I told you about in my vows, Dad, the person who chooses the harder right thing." I sat with my daughter in her kitchen for a very long time. I thought about 2 years of Sunday dinners in gutters and burgundy wine and a man who had arrived at my door with his homework done. I thought about what it costs a person to tell the truth to someone they love, knowing the truth might end the thing they love. I thought about the stories I had told Lily when she was 7, about heroes, about people who did the right thing even when it was hard. I thought about what right looked like when the shape of it was not simple. I still have the photograph on my nightstand. I keep it there because every morning, before the world has a chance to remind me how complicated everything is, I need to see her face the way it looked that day, full of light, full of certainty. I need to see that moment, not because it was the end of something, but because it was, despite everything, the beginning. And because the man standing beside her, his hand on the small of her back, his smile wide and real for the cameras, was not the man I thought I knew. He was something harder to name and harder to dismiss. He was a man who had made serious mistakes and was trying, at enormous personal cost, to make them right, who had stood in the garden on his wedding day with a debt collector in the shadows and spoken vows he meant, who had told my daughter the truth about himself before she agreed to belong to his life. I am not finished being afraid for her. I do not think I will be for a long time, but I know something about structures, about what holds and what fails, about where real strength lives, and I've decided to keep watching, to keep the photograph where I can see it, to trust, carefully and with my eyes open, the woman my daughter has chosen to be, and to be ready, the way a father is always ready to hold the weight of whatever comes next.